Level 1. The talent. You're 27 years old and you have a gift that nobody teaches in school. You can read a room before you walk into it. You can feel the temperature of a crisis the way some people feel weather coming, a shift in pressure, a change in the quality of the air. Within 30 seconds of being briefed on a situation, exactly what the real problem is, which is almost never the problem the client thinks it is. You learned this working PR for a regional hospital in Ohio, where your first real crisis was a surgeon accused of operating while impaired. The hospital's legal team wanted to stonewall. The communications director wanted a carefully worded statement about ongoing internal review. You were the most junior person in the room, and you told them both they were wrong. You said, "He needs to resign today," with a statement that acknowledges the concern without admitting the specific allegation, and the hospital needs to announce a new patient safety protocol by Friday. You said it calmly, with the specific certainty of someone who has already run every other scenario and found them wanting. The hospital followed your advice. The story peaked on day 3 and was gone by day 6. The surgeon quietly settled a separate matter 18 months later, but by then, the hospital's name was clean, and your name was starting to travel. By 27, you've handled 14 crises for 7 different clients. You've never left fingerprints. You've never been quoted in a story. You are, professionally speaking, a ghost, and ghosts in this business command a premium. Level 2. The firm you're 30. You've left the agency and started your own practice with 2 employees, a researcher named Dom and a media analyst named Keiko, operating out of a 2-room office above a dry cleaner in Washington, D.C. Your clients are mid-level, a state senator with a financial disclosure problem, a pharmaceutical company whose clinical trial data has been leaked in a misleading form, a university president whose remarks at a private dinner have been recorded without his knowledge and are about to appear in a student publication. Each situation is different. Each one requires the same fundamental skill, identifying who has what they want, and what they can actually be given in exchange for what you need them to do. You're not a lawyer. You don't pay anyone off. What you do is construct the version of events that best serves your client while remaining technically defensible, a statement that is true in every individual word and false in its overall impression, a timeline that emphasizes the favorable and omits the damaging without lying about either. You tell yourself, and you mean it, that you never help a client cover up something that should result in criminal charges. You have a line. You know where it is. You have turned down 2 clients who crossed it. You are, by every measure available to you, one of the good ones. Level 3. The reputation. You're 33. The firm has 8 employees and a client list that has moved significantly upmarket. A leaked video, an executive's private messages, a celebrity's undisclosed financial arrangement with a foreign entity. The situations have gotten more complex, the stakes higher, the clients more demanding and less honest about the full picture when they first call you. You've developed a rule for this. You ask every new client, in the first meeting, to tell you the worst thing, the thing they haven't told their lawyer, their spouse, their board. You tell them you can't help if you don't know the full shape of it. Most clients appreciate this. A few have walked out. The ones who walked out were the right ones to lose. Your name has started appearing in trade publications, oblique references, unnamed sources describing your methods. You are known in the specific world where people need to know you as someone who fixes things permanently rather than temporarily, someone who doesn't create secondary problems while solving the primary one. A man named Elliot Graves calls you on a Thursday. He runs a private equity firm. He is 62, well-connected, and in possession of a problem he describes as sensitive. He asks if you can come to his office on Friday. You can. You do. You sit across from him and you ask him for the worst thing. He tells you, and it is, genuinely, the worst thing you've heard in 6 years of doing this work. You take the case anyway. Level 4. The Graves account. You spend 4 days with the Graves situation before you understand its full architecture. The surface problem is a former employee, a woman named Diana Chen who worked as a portfolio analyst for 3 years before resigning. She has retained an attorney. Her attorney has sent a letter to Graves's general counsel outlining claims of a hostile work environment and requesting documentation of several internal communications. The real problem, the one Graves told you in his office, is that those internal communications exist, and they are significantly worse than what Diana Chen's attorney currently suspects. If the full record is produced in Discovery, it doesn't just expose Graves personally. It exposes 4 other partners, 2 of whom sit on the boards of publicly traded companies. Your job is to manage the situation such that Diana Chen's legitimate complaints are addressed. A settlement, a genuine apology, meaningful policy changes at the firm, in a way that resolves the matter before Discovery ever begins. This is, technically, what settlements are for. Lawyers do this every day. The difference, and you know this, is that you are not Graves' attorney. You are his communications consultant. Your role is not to negotiate a settlement. Your role is to make Diana Chen and her attorney believe that a settlement is in their best interest before they fully understand what the discovery process might reveal. You do this by managing the public narrative around the situation, not suppressing it exactly, but shaping the information environment in which Diana Chen's attorney is making decisions. You make sure the right story is told at the right time to the right people. The settlement is reached in 6 weeks. Diana Chen receives a meaningful sum and a formal apology. Graves receives protection from a discovery process that would have ended him. You tell yourself Diana got what she deserved to get. You tell yourself she was fairly compensated. You don't ask yourself whether she would have gotten more if she'd known everything. Level 5. The method you're 36. The Graves account opens a door you didn't fully realize was a door until you were already through it. The clients who come after Graves are different in a specific way. They're not mid-level executives with embarrassing emails. They're people for whom the normal consequence management infrastructure, lawyers, PR agencies, internal communications teams, has already failed or is inadequate. They come to you because the problem is too large for ordinary channels. You develop what you privately call the architecture, a systematic approach to crisis situations that operates on 3 simultaneous tracks. The first track is narrative. You identify the story that best serves your client, and you make sure it exists in enough credible places that it becomes the default framing before any competing version can establish itself. The second track is relational. Every story has sources. Sources have interests. You identify what those interests are, and you find legal, legitimate ways to ensure that the people who could tell the damaging version of events have good reasons to tell a different one instead. The third track is what you call the pressure release. Every crisis has a true component, a genuine failure, a real mistake. You identify it, and you make sure your client addresses it visibly and sincerely. This does 2 things. It protects your client legally by demonstrating good faith, and it absorbs the public appetite for accountability, leaving nothing for the more damaging truth to attach to. The architecture is elegant. It is, you believe, genuinely ethical in its structure. It never requires lying, never requires illegal activity, never requires silencing anyone by force. What it requires is that you be very precise about what you consider lying. Level 6. The Senator. You're 38. A sitting U.S. Senator's Chief of Staff calls you at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. The Senator, you'll call him Harlan throughout, because that's not his name, is facing a story that will break in 72 hours. A journalist at a national publication has been working it for 4 months. The story concerns a series of payments from a foreign-linked lobbying entity to a nonprofit that the Senator controls, and the subsequent favorable treatment of that entity's interests in 2 pieces of legislation the Senator co-sponsored. This is potentially a federal crime. It is certainly a career-ending story if it runs as written. You take the case. Not because you believe Harlan is innocent. You ask him for the worst thing. And what he tells you is bad enough that you spend the next 2 hours sitting very still in your own kitchen, thinking carefully. You take it because the 72 hours the story hasn't broken are 72 hours in which the architecture can be deployed. And because at some point in the last decade of doing this work, you have stopped experiencing 72 hours as a moral problem and started experiencing it as a professional opportunity. You spend those hours doing 3 things. You get a competing story, a genuine one, a positive one about the Senator's work on a veterans legislation package, placed in 4 separate outlets with enough weight that it occupies the news cycle the day the damaging story is scheduled to run. You identify the journalist's 2 key sources, and you determine, through entirely legal research, that one of them has a prior professional relationship with a political opponent of the Senator's that was never disclosed. You make sure this information reaches the publication's editor 24 hours before the story runs. and you arrange for the senator to make a voluntary public disclosure about the nonprofit's funding, framed as a transparency initiative, preempting the story's central revelation and reframing it as something the senator himself surfaced. The story runs. It's smaller than it would have been. The source credibility issue muddies the water enough. The voluntary disclosure preempts the most damaging element. Harlan survives. You drive home at 4 a.m. and you think about the journalist's sources. The two people who tried to tell a true story and were stopped. One of them in a way that ended a professional relationship and raised questions about their integrity that will follow them for years. You think about this for approximately 45 minutes. Then you go to sleep. Level 7, the network. You're 41. The firm has 22 employees, a secondary office in New York, and a client list that you keep on a server with access restricted to you and Dom, who has been with you since the dry cleaner office and who asks fewer questions than he used to. You have become, without precisely deciding to become it, an infrastructure. Not just a consultant, but a node in a network of people and institutions that manage information on behalf of the powerful. Lawyers, lobbyists, investigators, journalists who owe favors, editors who take calls, publicists who understand the value of a well-timed non-story. The network is not organized. There is no conspiracy. It is simply the accumulated result of 100 relationships built over 15 years, each one legitimate in isolation, each one useful in combination, creating a system that functions as though it were designed without anyone having designed it. You are not the only person in the network, but you are increasingly the person other people in the network call when they need the full picture moved rather than just managed. A man named Peter Voss calls you. He is general counsel for a technology company whose internal research has produced findings about one of their products that, if disclosed, would trigger regulatory action in at least 3 countries and potentially criminal liability for several executives. He doesn't ask you to suppress the research. He asks you to help him develop a communication strategy for a period of internal review. You know what internal review means in this context. You say yes anyway, because you have said yes to enough things like this that the individual yes is no longer a decision. It is momentum. Level 8, the journalist. You're 43. A journalist named Marcus Webb has been watching you for 18 months. Not you specifically at first. He started with the Graves account. Diana Chen agreed to speak with him, off the record 2 years after her settlement, because the NDA she signed covered specific factual claims, but not her general impressions of how the process unfolded. From Diana, he traced backward to 3 other situations where the same fingerprints appeared. The same pattern of competing narratives placed at strategic moments, the same source credibility questions surfacing at convenient times, the same voluntary disclosures that preempted rather than revealed. He has your name. He has a general outline of the architecture. He has 5 former clients who declined to speak on record, but whose responses told him enough to know he was looking at the right person. He calls you directly. He identifies himself and his publication and tells you he is working on a story about crisis communications firms that operate in the space between legitimate PR and obstruction of legitimate accountability processes. He asks if you'd like to comment. You sit with the phone in your hand for a long moment. You know exactly what to do. You have done it to other people. You know which elements of his approach are vulnerable, which sources are likely, which framing you can preempt, how to make the story smaller before it runs. You start running the architecture against Marcus Webb, and then you stop. Not for ethical reasons, not yet. You stop because you realize for the first time that the architecture requires you to undermine a journalist who is, by every standard you can apply, doing his job correctly, investigating a legitimate public interest story with careful, documented sourcing. Marcus Webb is doing what you prevented Diana Chen from benefiting from. He is doing what Harlan's sources tried to do. He is doing the thing that the architecture exists to prevent. You sit with this for longer than 45 minutes. Level 9, the calculation. You spend 2 weeks not returning Marcus Webb's calls. In those 2 weeks, your firm continues operating normally. 3 new client inquiries. A situation in London that Dom handles with your remote oversight. A clean resolution to a pharmaceutical matter that you're proud of in the narrow way you allow yourself to be proud of things now. And then you get a call from Peter Voss. The technology company's internal research has been leaked. Not by you, not by anyone in your network, but by a junior engineer who copied files to a personal drive 18 months ago. and has just handed them to a different journalist at a different publication. The story will run in 10 days. Voss wants you to deploy the architecture. You think about the engineer, 26 years old probably, sitting with a personal drive for 18 months, deciding whether to use it, doing the calculation about what it would cost and choosing to pay it. You think about what the architecture would do to that person, what it has done to people like that person before, while you were too focused on the client to look too carefully. You tell Voss you can't help him. He asks why. You tell him you have a conflict of interest and refer him to another firm. You hang up, you sit at your desk, you think about 15 years of cases, and you start, for the first time, to count the people on the other side of each one. Not the clients, the other people. The ones who tried to say something true and were managed. The number is larger than you expected. Level 10, The Reckoning. Marcus Webb's story runs on a Thursday. It is careful, well-sourced, and accurate in every specific detail that you can identify. It describes the architecture without naming it that way. It names you by name. It names the Graves account, 3 others you recognize, and 2 situations you weren't involved in, but which the framing connects to your general method. The story is not a takedown. It is an examination. It asks questions rather than making accusations. The questions are the right ones. Your phone does not stop for 4 days. Clients calling to understand their exposure. Former clients calling to understand theirs. 2 partners in the network calling to understand what you told Marcus Webb. Dom calling to ask what happens to the firm. You handle all of it with the same competence you bring to every crisis. You answer what you can answer, refer what needs referring, say nothing that creates new problems. And then, on the 5th day, you call Marcus Webb. You tell him you'd like to meet. He agrees. Cautiously, you sit across from him in a coffee shop, and you talk for 3 hours. Not on background, not off the record. On the record with your name attached, about how the architecture works, and what it has been used for, and how the network functions, and which situations you now believe crossed lines that you told yourself at the time you were not crossing. You do not confess to crimes. Your attorney is very clear about what you can and cannot say. But you tell the truth about the system in a way that makes the system visible, which is something you have spent 15 years making sure it never was. You don't know why you do it. That's not entirely true. You know exactly why. You just haven't admitted it yet, even to yourself. You did it because Marcus Webb reminded you, by doing his job correctly and persistently and without being stopped, that the thing you built your career on was the belief that the truth was manageable, that it could be shaped, delayed, redirected, absorbed into a better constructed version of itself. And Marcus Webb, by simply continuing to ask the right questions in the right way, showed you that it isn't. Truth, it turns out, is not a crisis. It's a pressure, and pressure, given enough time, always finds a way through. Level 11. The Consequence. The second story runs 6 weeks after the first. It is longer. It names more situations. It includes your on-the-record account of the architecture and how it functioned. It includes testimony from Diana Chen, from 2 of Harlan's former sources, from the junior engineer at the technology company whose leak you declined to manage. 3 of your former clients face regulatory inquiries within 4 months of the story running. 2 of them retain attorneys and begin producing documents they had previously kept internal. Harlan does not survive his next election. Elliot Graves settles a second claim, larger than the first, from a different former employee who saw the first story and found an attorney. Your firm closes, not because you were forced to close it. There is no criminal finding against you, no license to lose, no professional sanction beyond the reputational one. You close it because Dom resigns, and Keiko resigned before the second story ran, and the client list has reduced itself to 2 people who either didn't read the stories or don't care. And you find you don't want to do this work for people who don't read or don't care. You are 44. You have money, a significant amount, earned legitimately over 15 years and invested carefully. You have a reputation that is now a complicated one, neither hero nor villain, somewhere in the space between whistleblower and perpetrator that the law doesn't have clean language for. You have time, for the first time in 15 years, to sit with the number of people on the other side, the ones the architecture managed. It is not a small number. Level 12, The Other Side. You teach now, not at a prestigious institution. You weren't offered one, and you wouldn't have accepted anyway, because the credential would have felt like the architecture applied to yourself. a community college in Virginia, a communications ethics course, 2 sections per semester, 30 students each. The students are mostly in their early 20s. They want to work in PR, in corporate communications, in politics. They are learning the mechanics of how information moves and how it can be shaped. You teach them the mechanics accurately because the mechanics are real and useful and not inherently wrong. You also teach them something no textbook covers. The distance between the first compromise and the last one is not as long as it looks from the beginning. Every professional who ends up somewhere they didn't intend to end up took a series of individually rational steps to get there. The steps made sense at the time. They always make sense at the time. You tell them about Diana Chen without using her name. You tell them about the engineer without using his name. You tell them about the architecture, not as a cautionary tale exactly, but as a case study in how a system can be technically ethical at every individual point and structurally corrupt in its overall effect. You tell them the thing you wish someone had told you at 27, when you were the most junior person in a room full of people making the wrong decision, and you were right, and you knew it. The gift is real. The gift of reading a room, of understanding what the real problem is, of constructing the version of events that serves your client. It's real, and it's valuable, and it will take you places. The question is not whether you have the gift. The question is who you decide to use it for.